We're speaking right now to the Shadow Housing Secretary, is now Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, Kevin Hollinrake, who joins us. Very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Good afternoon. You were under Rishi Sunak's premiership. You were the Post Office Minister. So your reaction to this, those are just the most extraordinary numbers that just sort of come into my view. 13 postmasters may have taken their own lives, 59 considered it, 10 who'd actually tried to commit suicide. Devastation on people's lives, but this call for urgent action to tackle what is one of the worst scandals in public life. What do you say?
Yeah, terrible. And I can't say I was surprised, Julia. I got involved in trying to help with the scandal from the backbenches in 2020, and you heard those cases as horrendous situations people were in. And when your life is ruined, when your reputation is ruined in your local community, it's not surprising people might consider taking their own life, because
you've gone from being an upstanding member of the local community to people shouting at your kids on the way to school.
Terrible.
Absolutely awful.
Yeah.
Look, I know that you are one of the people and the ministers who has been, praised by those post office campaigners, long before it became sort of more publicly known by that ITV fictionalised documentary, that drama. And you're trying to take action, but has enough action been taken? Because again and again and again, we're told people could get compensation, but then people aren't getting compensation. People are still dying, having not had compensation for the terrible, terrible treatment they were handed out, and the massive financial, familial and losses and reputational losses they have suffered. Was it a mistake to basically put the Post Office, who are the cause of all this, in charge of dealing with those compensation claims?
Yes, it was a mistake, and I said so in 2020 when they did that. And also, the solicitors involved in defending the Post Office in the legal action, Herbert Smith-Freehills, were left in charge of that compensation scheme too. It was a horrendous mistake. We subsequently reversed that. We also overturned 700 convictions by statute. That's never been done before. We brought forward fixed sum awards so that people could just, without having to go through a complex assessment of their loss, they could just take that money off the table, which many people have done, which is why compensation has gone from a few tens of millions of pounds to over £1 billion. We also picked people like James Arbuthnot, Lord Arbuthnot, who featured with dramatisation of the series, in charge of the Compensation Advisory Board to make it truly independent and cross-party. Kevin Jones also was on that board. So we did many things to try and get this right. Could we have done more? Of course. There are some things I would like to have done that we didn't do at the time, but I've committed to work with Johnny Reynolds and Gareth Thomas, who are the ministers now in charge of that process, in any way I can, to assist in trying to make sure we accelerate compensation with the people who are still expecting it as well.
The trouble with this scandal, and it's been a horrific scandal, we also had, the blood scandal with haemophiliacs, given, blood that was infected with HIV and hepatitis. We've had numerous other scandals. And always the key thing is something happens, people at some level realise something is going horribly wrong, and that is covered up. And the urge to protect the institution, whichever it is, the NHS or the Post Office, or whether it's private or public, there is always an urge to cover it up rather than to do the right thing, to speak up and say, something's going horribly wrong, we need to stop doing this and we need to tackle it. Why does that keep happening? Whether, again and again, in every area of life in this country, this is a serious systemic problem that we have, is it not, in our public life?
It keeps happening because we don't hold the people to account who are responsible for the cover-up. That's what happens. The reason I got involved in the Post Office is because I was campaigning on behalf of other people wronged by the banks, RBS, Lloyds HBOS, and the same thing had happened there. The people who were responsible for those outrages, those mistreatment, which also resulted in suicides, have got off scot-free. They've taken their bonuses and they've gone. Until somebody gets held to account for these scandals, and that's the other part of what needs to happen with the Post Office scandal. Compensation is one thing, putting people in jail is another.
Well, I was going to ask you what you mean by held to account, but that is what it means, isn't it? Not people getting fined, because that's a company, that's a business, not suing people, people going to prison and realising if they cover things up, that they are adding to the crime that has been committed.
That's right.
Okay.
I was told, so when I went into some of the media around that when I was Post Office Minister, and I was told by certain people within the department, don't mention people going to jail. straight away I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say people should go to jail because they should. Yeah. And you know, I think clearly we don't take responsibility for prosecutions. That's our police force, forces, it's the Crown Prosecution Service, but we've urged them to take forward this investigation and conclude those quickly and prosecute people, because that's what should happen. If anybody watched the inquiry, the in-depth inquiry that Sir Win Williams did, there were people who were clearly culpable in anybody's view in terms of that cover-up. They knew what was going on back in 2013 and even earlier, and they decided not to say anything for PR purposes, which is outrageous and has led to many people being destitute, their lives devastated. It's simply wrong. Somebody has to carry the can, and that should include criminal prosecution and a jail sentence.
OK, Kevin Hollinrake, thank you for that. Well, look, we invited you on, first of all, really to talk about the trip to the UK, the state visit from Emmanuel Macron, along with his wife, Brigitte Macron. They arrived a little bit early. They have now arrived at Windsor Castle. They've been greeted by the King and the Queen. They are now making a sort of military procession going on. There's an awful lot of horses and cavalry guards and the like. The question we're asking really is, why on earth are we rolling out the red carpet for Emmanuel Macron, a man who has done everything he can to try and not just undermine but punish the British people for that democratic vote for Brexit, threatened to cut off the electricity to the Channel Islands over a fishing dispute, has made demand after demand after demand, a punishment beating for those in Northern Ireland to try and make life as difficult for them, has failed despite being given £771 million of taxpayers' money to actually stop the boats leaving, the dinghies leaving Calais and coming to our shores. Why on earth are we rolling out the red carpet to him? Oh, by the way, a lame duck as well. Lost a parliamentary election and has only got less than 2 years in office. Why are we doing this?
Well, fair question. Clearly, France. I'm a great admirer of France, and some of the French people as well are very nice. I like going to the country and
so do
allies. There you go. Allies and friends. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything they do or say. And I agree with you. I mean, I think a number of people within the European Union deliberately made life difficult for us.
Oh, Kevin. Sorry, all right, Kevin.
Irresponsible, unfair, and actually detrimental to their own constituents.
Yeah, sorry, we lost you a little bit there, but I think we've got the gist of it. You say they're allies and friends, but it's been interesting, that question I put to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss some years back during the leadership election, you know, Emmanuel Macron, friend or foe? Rishi Sunak immediately said friend. Liz Truss said, you know, the jury's out. But the jury is still out, isn't it? Oh, right, we've got you. I think we've got you. We're going to persevere.
Oh, sorry. So sorry.
It's just come back again. So is he a friend or foe?
Well, I think he can be both, can't he? At times, you know, you're going to have differences of opinion with the other person on the other side of the negotiating table. So you shouldn't think everything they're going to do is in our interests. That doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable when we disagree. But our negotiations should be forceful. It should be in our interests. And I think it's fair to say we spent a fortune on that agreement with France for very little reward in terms of reduction in the numbers of people coming across the Channel. I do think the only solution to this, having said that, is what we did have, which is the Rwanda plan. It needs a deterrent.
Yeah. But it wasn't. It was only going to be a few hundred people. It wasn't going to work as a deterrent.
Not true. That's not true, Julie. You're not looking at the deterrent impact of that. That scheme could have been scaled to any size, but it wouldn't have needed to be because it's a deterrent. We know people would not want to come to the UK if that meant they'd actually end up in Rwanda.
If only a couple of hundred people out of the 20,000 who've arrived in the last 6 months were sent to Rwanda, I reckon they'd take those odds. They're probably better than the odds of surviving the Channel migrant crossing.
Yeah, they would take those odds, that's right, but that's not the purpose of the scheme. The purpose of the scheme could be scaled in such a way that every single person who arrives on our shores illegally would be deported.
If it was scaled, then they'd be similar to Australia, and then it would work. What do you make of this idea of this one-in, one-out scheme? Now, ostensibly, it sounds crazy. We're going to have the same number of people. The idea being that we get to return to France illegal migrants who've paid people smugglers to come on dinghies, but we take someone who is being vetted as an asylum seeker to come to our country. Now, Do you think that that could actually have a deterrent effect? So there's no point the migrants paying the people smugglers, so we actually wouldn't end up taking so many people as we are currently taking illegally? Or are you concerned, as we are, that Keir Starmer is really bad at negotiating deals, so God knows what we'd end up paying the French for that, like we paid Mauritius for the Chagos Islands. But there's also an element where those legitimate asylum seekers, they would then be bringing their entire extended family with them, and we'd end up with even more people.
Well, it would have minimal effects. There's no question about it. So not the kind of solution we need. If you think about it, they're only going to take back what we take. So lots of people we take, the numbers are going to be greater. We're going to be taking a lot more people in than we're sending back. That's the reality with this. It just, all the stuff that Keir Starmer comes up with, it's never going to work. They smashed the gangs. We all knew it was complete nonsense. We've been trying to do that in the drug trade for 50 years. It's just simple. It's just a distraction. It's not a solution. The only solution is a brave solution, which is the ultimate deterrent of sending those people to another country, and not that they come back if they pass their asylum claim, but if they pass that asylum claim, if they're granted asylum, they stay in the country, the third country.
Okay.
That's the deterrent we need. That's the one he scrapped.
Can I ask you just a couple of the stories just before we let you go? Resident doctors, used to be known as junior doctors, they have voted by 90% on a turnout of 55% for strike action over pay once again. Last time they were expecting 22%, got it from the Labour government soon after they came into power. And this time they're asking for a 29% pay rise to restore their pay levels, they say, back to the level they were at in 2010. What's your reaction to that news?
Well, I think this has come as a result of the deal that was struck last year. You know, the Labour government came in, they settled the pay claim at face value without any strings attached. They were such easy negotiators to negotiate with. Clearly, Labour's backed by the unions. There's no question about that. So they have to dance to the unions' tune. The unions know exactly where they've got the Labour government. The Labour government basically the unions say jump, and Labour says how high. So it was inevitable that people will come back to the negotiating table and ask for more, and the chickens are coming home to roost.
They are. We'll be paying for it if we do. Also, finally, the sad news this morning that Lord Tebbit, has died at the age of 94. Of course, famous for being the right-hand man of Margaret Thatcher all those years. Of course, sadly, he and his wife were both very much badly hurt in the IRA Brighton bombing in 1984. His wife paralysed for life by that attack. But also famous for saying that he about his father when he didn't riot, when he didn't have a job, he got on his bike and looked for work. How big a loss is he to the Conservative cause?
Massive. I mean, straightforward, one of the big beasts of politics that we remember. We look at the nostalgia about politics in yesteryear, don't we? We think about people like Norman Tebbit. And that's a message that was controversial at the time. I absolutely totally
I never
agree
thought
with
it was controversial.
No,
I was
exactly.
a Labour voter at the time. I thought it wasn't.
Some people didn't like it. But I totally agree with it. At the end of the day, the world does not owe you a living. I was told that at school, I was told that at home, and that's the kind of Norman Tebbit message, and I completely agree with it. He'll be sadly missed. A great support and a great contributor to our party.
Kevin Hollinrake, really appreciate you joining. He's covered a lot of ground there. Shadow Housing Secretary now, former Post Office Minister under Rishi Sunak.